The night had grown early, quiet as wine lay in her bed, her mind heavy with the day's failures. She had gone to yet another job interview earlier, only to be turned down again. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She tried to push the thoughts away, focusing on her conversation with Jessica, but even that couldn't distract her from the growing anxiety. After ending the call with Jessica, Wine placed her phone on the nightstand and pulled the blankets up to her chin, hoping that sleep would come quickly. But just as her eyelids began to drop, a faint noise echoed through the apartment, causing her to tense up. At first, she thought she might be imagining things, but then the noise came again. This time, louder, closer. Her heart pounded in her chest as she slowly sat up, listening intently. She reached for the vase on her nightstand, gripping it tightly as she slid out of bed. The apartment was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon outside. Taking cautious steps, she moved toward the living room, every creak of the floorboards making her nerves spike. As she rounded the corner, she froze in place, her breath catching in her throat. A man was standing in the middle of her living room, his slit throat partially obscured by shadows. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and an aura of danger that made her skin crawl. The dim light highlighted the tattoo snaking up his muscular arms, and the gun he held casually in one hand sent a wave of horror. Wyan tried to scream, but the sound got stuck in her throat. The man turned his head slightly, his eyes locking onto hers before she could even think of running. He was moving toward her. His expression hard and determined. He grabbed her arm with a force that made her drop the vase, the glass shattering on the floor. Who are you? What are you doing here? Wine managed to stammer, her voice trembling with fear. The man's response was immediate. He didn't answer her question. Instead, he yanked her closer, his grip like steel around her waist. You are coming with me, he said, his voice low and commanding. One struggled against him, panic flooding her senses. Let me go, she cried, but he didn't loosen his hold. With a swift motion, he pulled her out of the apartment, dragging her down the dimly lit hallway. Despite her protests, by the time they reached the parking lot, Vine was out of breath from struggling, but the man didn't seem to care. He opened the door of a sleek black car and practically shoved her inside. She barely had time to register what was happening before he was in the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life. Where are you taking me? She demanded, her voice rising in panic. The man glanced at her, his expression unreadable. You will find out soon enough, he replied. The driver was tense and silent. Wine's mind raced with fear and confusion. She had no idea who this man was or why he was taking her. The city lights blurred as they sped through the streets, the night growing darker with each passing minute. Eventually, they pulled up to a large, imposing mansion on the outskirts of the city. The man parked the car and got out, pulling Wine along with him. She was too exhausted and scared to fight back anymore. He led her through the grand front doors and with up a winding staircase, finally stopping in front of a luxurious bedroom. You will stay here, he said, opening the door and pushing her inside. Wine stumbled into the room, her heart racing. What do you want from me? She whispered, turning to face him. The man's gaze softened slightly, but there was still a cold edge to his eyes. You don't need to know that right now. Just do as you are told and you won't get hurt. With that, he turned and left. Locking the door behind him, Wine stood there, trembling her mind, spinning with questions. Who was this man? Why had he taken her? And what was he planning to do with her? Days passed, and Wine quickly realized that she wasn't just a prisoner in this mansion. She was a captive of Jungkook, a man who was as dangerous as he was mysterious. was possessive, controlling, and unrelenting in his pursuit of her. Despite her fear, Wine couldn't help but notice the way his eyes lingered on her, the way he seemed to be drawn to her in a way that was both terrifying and intoxicating. Jungkook made it clear that she would now be his son Juni's teacher. Wine was taken aback by the sudden turn of events. She didn't understand why Jungkook had chosen her. Every day, she spent hours with Juni, teaching him and caring for him. All while under the watchful eye of Jungkook, Jungkook's possessiveness only grew stronger as the days went by. He would often find excuses to be near her, to touch her, to remind her that she was his. One tried to resist him, tried to keep her distance, but it was becoming harder and harder to deny the attraction that was slowly building between them. One evening, after Junie had gone to bed, Jungkook cornered Wine in the kitchen. His dark eyes bore into hers, and she could feel the tension between them like a physical force. Your mind, Wine, he murmured, his voice low and dangerous. Wine's heart raced. Jungkook, you can't just, I can. He interrupted, stepping closer, and I will. Before she could protest, he grabbed her waist, pulling her flush against him. His lips captured hers in a heated, possessive kiss that left her breathless. Wine's mind screamed at her to push him away, to fight back, but her body betrayed her, melting into his touch. Jungkook pulled back slightly, his breath hot against her lips. Why you belong to me? Why no one else don't even think about leaving? Wine's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, knowing that she had no choice. Jungkook was dangerous, and there was no escaping him. The weeks passed, their relationship continued to evolve. Jungkook was still possessive, but there were moments when Wine saw a glimpse of the man behind the cold exterior. He would sometimes sit with her late at night, talking about his past, about the pain he had endured, and Wine couldn't help but feel a growing sympathy for him. One night, as they lay in bed together, Wine finally gathered the courage to ask him about his previous wife. Jungkook, what happened to Amelia? She asked softly, her voice trembling. Jungkook tensed beside her, his expression darkening. Why do you want to know? He asked, his tone sharp. I want to understand you. Wine replied, her heart pounding. There was a long silence before Jungkook finally spoke, his voice low and filled with bitterness. Amelia betrayed me. He began, his eyes distant as he recalled the memories. I loved her, but she didn't care. She was unfaithful, sneaking around behind my back with another man. Wine's breath hissed as she listened, her heart aching for him. I found them together one night. Jungkook continued, his voice cold, in a car, kissing like I didn't exist. It broke me, Wine. It shattered everything I believed in. Wine reached out, placing a hand on his chest, feeling the tension in his muscles. What did you do? She whispered. Jungkook's gaze met hers, and she saw the darkness in his eyes. I made sure she could never betray me again. I killed her. Wine, I made it look like an accident, and no one ever suspected. Wine's blood ran cold at his confession. She wanted to pull away, to escape from the man who had just admitted that. But she couldn't, despite everything. She was falling in love with him, and the thought of leaving him was unbearable. Tears welled up in her eyes as she struggled to find the right words. Jungkook, I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Jungkook's expression softened slightly as he looked at her, his eyes filled with guilt and longing. It was hard wine, but I had to do it. I couldn't let her destroy me. Wine nodded, her heart itching for him. She didn't know what to say, how to comfort him, but she knew one thing. She couldn't leave him despite everything. She was his and he was hers. As they lay there, tangled in each other's arms, Wine made a silent promise to herself she would stay by Jungkook's side no matter what. She would be the one to heal the wounds left by his past, the one to show him that Love didn't have to end in betrayal, and as she closed her eyes, she knew that she had made her choice. She would be with Jungkook for better or for worse. The next morning, Wine woke up to find Jungkook already up and dressed. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, his back to her, staring out the window. The events of the previous night weighed heavily on her mind, and she knew they needed to talk. Jungkook, she began softly, her voice still thick with sleep. He didn't turn around, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. She reached out, gently placing her hand on his back. We need to talk about what you told me last night. Jungkook finally turned to face her, his expression unreadable. There is nothing more to say, he replied, his voice distant. You know the truth now. He sat up, pulling the blankets around her for comfort. But I need to understand, Jungkook, what happened. It was awful. But I need to know how you really feel about it. Do you regret what you did? Jungkook's jaw tightened and he looked away, his gaze fixed on the floor. Regret? He repeated, his voice low. I don't know why I did what I thought I had to do. Amelia betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I couldn't let her get away with it. Wine swallowed hard, trying to process his words. She wanted to comfort him, to offer him some kind of solace, but she didn't know how. But you're not the same person now, she said carefully. You have changed. I have seen it. Jungkook finally looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and confusion. Have I? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Or am I still the same man who's capable of doing something like that? One reached out, taking his hand in hers. You are different, Jungkook. I can see it in the way you care for Junie, in the way you were trying to protect me, but you need to forgive yourself for what happened. Holding on to that guilt is only hurting you more. Jungkook's grip tightened around her hand and he shook his head slightly. I don't deserve forgiveness. Why not after what I did? Wine moved closer, her heart itching for him. But you do, Jungkook. You have made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But that doesn't define who you are now. You have been through so much and you're still trying to do what's right. That's what matters.